Zhang Henshui's The Golden Fen Family Chapter 42. Yun Pui comes to avoid cross-examination, and the beloved concubine is angry. Seeing Yanxi's hesitation, Pai Feng snorted and sneered. Yanxi thought for a while and came up with an idea. Yin Dao, everything has to be settled by others, so you can criticize me. I just said the word Dongkang, but it was just a big hat. As for the detailed location, of course I have to go on. What? I said if you say Dongkang, isn't this kind of criticism wrong? Pei Feng said with a smile. Zhu Baji can't contain the monster, so I'll beat you up. Okay, even if I lose. Let me ask you, where does he live in Dongkang? Yanxi said, with a very honest look. He lives at No 100, Yaner Hutong. Pai Feng looked at Yanxi's face and said blankly. After thinking for a while, he smiled and said, don't talk nonsense. There is no such an alley. There can't be so many house numbers in an alley. Yanxi said, you have never been there. How can you conclude that there are no such house numbers? Not only there are many houses with numbers 100 and 200, Pai Feng said. The house numbers make sense, but I have never heard of Yaner Hutong. Yanxi said, Beijing is a very big place. How can you know everything? I said yes, but you must say no. What can you do? Pai Feng said, where can I go to Yaner Hutong? Yanxi said, this is a difficult question to ask. I went there by car. I was sitting in the car and walked through those alleys. How did I know that this was easy? If you want to go and see it, just ask the driver to drive directly to Yaner Hutong. Come on. Pai Feng said, okay, whatever you say is reasonable. Let me ask you again. What kind of person is she? Yanxi said, she is just an average person. There is nothing special about her. Said, there is something wrong with what you said. If there is nothing particularly beautiful about her appearance, why does your eldest brother want her? Yanxi said, it's just that she is younger, and when she wears good clothes, she won't feel bad. Pei Feng nodded and said with a smile, this is finally a good word from you. I am willing to take her home and compete with her. Humph. I won't let her compete. This is Wu. Yanxi said with a smile, that's it. You know this. Why are you angry? Pai Feng sneered. I don't deserve to be angry. How big is the house? I heard it is very well equipped, right? Yanxi said, it's just a small courtyard. I don't know how you can stay there. Pai Feng said, what kind of clothes is she wearing? Yanxi said, what can she wear at home? It's just a Paris serge jacket. Pai Feng said, she is so well dressed at home. That's it. What kind of background is she? Does she have to look too good? Yanxi said, and Pai Feng retorted. Yanxi smiled and said, in this case, my sister-in-law is not asking me, but seems to be quarreling with me. Isn't that wonderful? Pai Feng said with a smile, why should I quarrel with you? I think this is too much. It's a joke. I can't help but say a few words. Yanxi said, you said you only asked me 10 questions. There are about 10 questions. Do you have anything else to ask? If you want to ask me again, it's already 10. Apart from the questions, I can answer you casually. Pai Feng smiled and said, that's up to you. But I won't ask. Please tell me what you can. Yanxi said, I know. You can talk about it. It's none of my business. So why should I hide it? Then we talked a little bit about what we were talking about while eating. When Pai Feng was asking questions, he was talking and laughing. I won't ask any more questions now. Just listen to what Yanxi has to say. Just stay and listen. As she continued to listen, she stopped lying down and stood up. She put her right leg on her left leg, clasped her hands together, and hugged her forward. Her face looked very sad at first, and then she slowly raised the tip of her nose. After 2 shrugs, 7 or 8 tears rolled down her chest. The second aunt frowned and said to Yanxi, this is all the trouble caused by Laoqi's talkativeness. Children always stir up trouble at home, making your sister-in-law so sad. Yanxi said, where's this? Speaking of it, first, my sister-in-law asked me to tell her, and then she blamed me for being meddlesome. Isn't this an attempt to make me commit a crime? Pei Feng said, you can't blame Laoqi for not telling me, but I will continue to inquire. Come out. Don't mention it, my second aunt. When I see my mother, I will find him and comment on this matter in person. Pai Feng said, already making plans in her mind. There is no objection to people taking concubines. Then he straightened his face and said, second aunt, You don't know. I am a person who is about to turn 30. I will never be jealous. And instead of letting him fool around outside, it is better to let him beg for someone else. But if you want to beg someone, you have to tell your parents, pick a good person, and if you bring him back, you can help me a little bit. What's wrong with me? The second aunt said. What do you think of the young lady? Very true. Rather than letting the boss fool around all day long, it's better to let him know about it first, and not do it secretly. I think you won't object. He sat silently and shed tears for a while. Although Yanxi had a smile on his face, he was thinking in his heart that today's disaster was a big one. While chatting, he lifted the door curtain, looked up at the sun, and then slipped away. Paifeng felt extremely aggrieved here, so she walked back to her room, thinking and crying and thinking again. When Ma Zhang saw that the situation was different from usual, she went to Mrs. Jin's room to report. Said, Madam, go and take a look. Our young mistress doesn't know why she was wronged. She cried for most of the day today. I looked like she was very angry, but I didn't dare to ask. Mrs. Jin said, she has always been at odds with the boss. Daozi and Huiqing were both sitting in the room. Daozi smiled at Huiqing. When Mrs. Jin saw it, she smiled and said, that's right. You and your wife were also at odds. How are you now? Huiqing said, he has been angry with me many times. I don't have the same understanding as him. Mrs. Jin stood up and said, he said, I won't ask you about your business for now. I'll take a look at that first. Then he followed Zhang Ma all the way to Paifeng's yard. As he happened to turn around the corridor, he bumped into Feng Zhu. Mrs. Jin grabbed him and said, where are you from? You are very busy. Your wife is about to die. Why don't you go and take a look? Feng Zhu. When Zhou suddenly heard this, he was startled and asked, then why? Is it true? Seeing that he was really frightened, Mrs. Jin took this opportunity to hold him back, and said sternly, how do I know? You and I can go and take a look. At this time, Feng Zhu couldn't help but follow his mother, walking in front of Mrs. Jin while talking. Paifeng was sitting alone in the room, weeping. When she heard footsteps outside, she looked out through the glass window, quickly took a step back, and lay on the bed facing forward. Mrs. Jin and Feng Zhu came in and asked, Paifeng, how are you? Are you feeling unwell? Paifeng lay down and remained silent for a long time. Mrs. Jin stepped forward, pushed her, and asked, how are you? Are you asleep? Paifeng turned over, slowly supported her body with her hands, sat up, and said, Mom, come on. I don't feel any discomfort. Seeing her haggard and pitiful look, Feng Zhu couldn't help but feel sorry for her, so he said, let's ask the doctor to take a look. Paifeng looked at Feng Zhu and stood up with a sneer. He said, it turns out that the uncle is back. You are very busy. Who are we? Who are you? Did the uncle talk to me just now? Although Feng Zhu was robbed of a few words by her, he was crying when he saw her. Secondly, when my mother was in person, she was completely patient and said nothing. Mrs. Jin also said with a straight face, I am not the one who destroyed your prestige in front of your wife. You have really made a lot of noise these days. Feng Zhu accompanied him with a smile, and said, but I don't live at home. What's the fuss about? Paifeng pointed at Feng Zhu and said, you can only offend your mother. How can you offend anyone else? My concubine has rented a mansion, bought a car, and everything. Yes, why are you saying there's no trouble? It doesn't matter if you don't come back. No one will care about you if you don't come back for 10 or 8 years. But you can't just leave me. We have to negotiate carefully. A negotiation? Do you think that as long as you are rich and powerful, you can use a car and a house as a plaything? You don't want me, but I don't want you. Let's go together. Go to the hospital and get this thing out of your stomach. Then we can negotiate without any problems. Feng Zhu's temper has always been intolerable. Paifeng pointed at him and scolded him like this. How could he be willing to be vague? Moreover, in front of my mother, it would be very embarrassing if she tolerated her like this. He said, is your statement a human thing? Paifeng said, yes, it is not a human thing. What you are doing is not a human thing. In today's age, marriage must be absolutely free. Since you are not happy, if you want me, I don't have to ask you. Let me live in this place for the time being. It's my realm. It's a bit of a mean place. I don't dare to bother you. Please come out. Please come out. When he said this, he raised his hands and made a gesture of splashing water outwards. Mrs. Jin originally thought that her son was of the same group. Now that I saw Pai Feng speaking with a high-spirited and inviolable attitude, and Feng Zhu didn't say anything, I immediately changed my mind and thought that Pai Feng was wrong. The color on his face was no longer as peaceful as before, and he looked quite disapproving of Pai Feng. Yin said to Pai Feng, "Why are you like this? Can't you say it slowly? I see those small families who have no food or water and are noisy every day. It can be said that there is nothing they can do. People like us, it's not as good as the superiors, but it's more than the inferiors. Why are we arguing like this every day? What does it mean for a good person to go on crying and scolding like this?" Mrs. Jin's words seemed to be scolding on both sides, but she was admiring them. After Feng listened, he scolded himself every time he said it. I thought that it would be a bit biased for my mother-in-law to protect her husband when he was acting so recklessly. He said, "Who is willing to make trouble like this every day?" You, old man, did not investigate what he did. If you knew it completely, you would know that what I said was right. I won't say it either, so as not to say that I am spreading rumors. Please investigate and find out. Mrs. Jin said, "I already know a little bit about him, but you're just making trouble in secret, and don't say anything to me. It's like I like to be nosy, so I'm worried about it. But it's hard to ask. Otherwise, wouldn't it be possible for us as masters to instigate discord among you?" At this point, he turned back to Feng Zhu and said harshly, "You are also unmotivated. As long as you hide it from your father and me, you can do anything big. According to many people, you got someone else out there. How is this really possible? How bold is it to start a new home?" Pai Feng leaned against the copper bedrail and held it up with his hands. When he heard this, he sneered twice. When Mrs. Jin saw it, she said, "Pai Feng, why are you sneering? Do you think our master is stupid?" Pai Feng laughed and said, "What is mother saying? Feng Zhu and I are trying to reason in front of you. We are asking you to. How dare you talk about your mother?" Mrs. Jin sat down on a chair next to her, crossed her fingers and put her hands on her chest, and was speechless for a while. Pai Feng just said a lot, but at this time her mother-in-law remained silent and did not dare to say more. Feng Zhu had done something wrong and was worried that there was no way to change the situation, so he didn't know how to express his words. So I found a half-remaining cigarette butt in the cigarette tray on the table and put it in my mouth. There were no matches for a while, so I just pursed my lips like this. At this time, Huiqing and Daozi had already arrived, and Yufan and Miley also came. First, everyone stood in the outer room to listen, and then everyone walked in. Miley leaned on Mrs. Jin's shoulder and said, "Mom, are you angry again?" Mrs. Jin shook her shoulders and frowned. "I'm very upset. Don't make a fuss." Miley turned around and stuck out her tongue at Daozi. Yufan stretched out her index finger, raked her face a few times, and smiled at her again. Miley curled her lips at Yufan and said, "What's there to be ashamed of? Haven't you ever run into a snag?" The second concubine got the news here and thought that what Yanxi told Pai Feng was all said in her room. Now that the matter has become a big deal, she will inevitably have to take some responsibility, so she quietly walked here. Now seeing Miley and Mrs. Jin quarreling, she interrupted and said, "You still want to make a fuss? Everything is ruined by you." Miley said, "What does it have to do with me?" The second concubine blurted out something, and then she realized that if she explained it, Yanxi would inevitably be dragged out. Then he walked into the room, took Miley's hand, and said, "Don't be so childish, let's go." Miley said, "People are here to stop the fight, and you want me to leave?" Daozi smiled and said, "Look, my eldest brother has a cigarette in his mouth, but it's not lit. Eighth sister, find a match to light it for him." Everyone in the room was talking and gossiping, but Mrs. Jin and Feng Zhu and his wife remained silent. Mrs. Jin was the first to speak. "Feng Zhu, from today on, I will call you every night to see if you are at home. If you are still too busy to be seen, I will definitely tell your father and let him find a way to deal with you. When that time comes, you must not beg for mercy." Feng Zhu still remained silent after hearing this. Pai Feng said, "It doesn't matter whether he comes back or not, but since he has found someone else, the whole family knows about it, and we shouldn't keep it a secret from father. When father comes back, he and I will go to see him. It's up to you, the elders, to decide. If you want to bring that person back, then bring her back. If you want her to live somewhere else, then let her live somewhere else. When Pai Feng said this, her face was so stiff that there was not even a trace of smile. Fengju saw that the situation was so awkward, and it was not good to say it or not. Mrs. Jin said, "That's fine. I'm not qualified to take care of your affairs. Let your father come forward to solve it. I'm leaving now, and let you guys make trouble on your own." After saying this, she stood up and was about to leave. Miley stretched out her hands to stop Mrs. Jin, and said with a smile, "Mom, you can't leave. If you leave, my brother and sister-in-law will start fighting, and I can't pull them apart." Mrs. Jin said, "Stop it, let me go." Miley dragged Mrs. Jin's hand, but looked at Fengju and said, "Brother, tell me, are you and sister-in-law going to fight or not?" Fengju couldn't help laughing and said, "You expect us to perform the golden branch? My father is not as good as Guozi, and I don't have the courage." Pai Feng said, "You are obviously laughing at me for being from a low family background and not worthy of you, the Prime Minister's son. But now, in the Republic era, marriage is equal, and class should not be a matter of course. Besides, my family has some background, so the class difference is not that big." Fengju said, "I know your father is a man of academic achievement and very knowledgeable. We are not worthy of him." Yufan smiled and said, "Where is Aunt Zhang? Make a pot of hot tea." Aunt Zhang agreed. Yufan said, "Don't be in a hurry. Check if there are any melon, seeds or peanuts in your young mistress's glass box. If there are, put them into plates. In my room, someone has just sent a large box of Egyptian cigarettes. They have also brought it here." Everyone saw her laughing and talking loudly, and they couldn't guess what was going on, so they all looked at her in a hurry. She smiled and said, "Why are you looking at me? Don't you recognize me? Don't you talk about your status at home, brother and sister-in-law? I don't think this matter can be explained in a few words. I think we should drink tea, crack melon seeds, and talk slowly. I wonder if brother and sister-in-law will agree?" After she said this, everyone realized that she was joking, and they all laughed. Just this smile suppressed the unhappiness of many people. Mrs. Jin couldn't help but laugh, and said, "Yufan is so sharp-tongued. When she talks, she doesn't make people angry, but she doesn't make people laugh either." Fengju smiled and said, "Look, there are people in the room and outside the room. It seems like they are here to see something." As he spoke, he walked out to chat. Pai Feng said, "Hey, don't leave. You have to finish the negotiation we are doing first." Fengju said, "I won't leave. This is my home. Where can I go?" Pai Feng said, "It's better if you don't leave. We can talk things over slowly." This made Fengju feel uncomfortable whether to leave or not. He just paced back and forth in the room outside. Yufan said to Pai Feng, "Sister-in-law, come to my room and sit down. If you like, we can play a little card game." Pai Feng said, "What about playing cards? I don't know whether I will live or die." Yufan took Pai Feng's hand and said, "Let's go." Then, while she was talking, she took her hand and bent her body toward the door. Pai Feng was not paying attention at first, and was dragged by her for several steps. She smiled and said, "Don't pull me. I'm sick. If you pull me and I fall to death, you will be sued." Yufan said, "Yes. I forgot that my sister-in-law is a bisexual. I was too careless." Pai Feng said, "Nonsense. That's not what I meant. Don't be picky." Yufan let go and said, "I dare not pull you anyway. As for whether you go or not, I dare not say. If you don't go." At this point, she smiled at Pai Feng. Daozi said, "Actually, playing cards, sitting for 2 or 3 hours, it's not a big deal." Pai Feng didn't want to play cards at first, because both of them said such jokes and smiled. Playing cards, what's the big deal? After playing cards, we can still come to negotiate. Let's go. As soon as she said she was going, everyone surrounded her like a gust of wind and went to Yufan's room. Fengju expected that there would be a big fight today, but he was taken away by Yufan with just a few words. After everyone left, he wandered around the room. Should he stay here or leave? If he stayed here, he would obviously be waiting for Pai Feng to come back and start a quarrel. If he left, he was afraid that Pai Feng would be anxious and Mrs. Jin might not agree. So he sat in the room restlessly, not knowing what to do. Later, he came up with a compromise idea. He would go to his mother's room and sit around to feel out what she had to say. If his mother could help him a little, it would be over with a simple mediation. Taking this opportunity to tell the matter of Wanxiang and solve it once and for all was also a solution. So he slowly walked to the door of his mother's room and stretched his head to look into the room. Mrs. Jin was lying on a soft couch, smoking a cigarette to relieve her boredom. When she looked up and saw Fengju, she shouted, "What are you doing? You're so sneaky." Fengju said, "I was afraid you would fall asleep, so I just looked around and didn't dare to come in." Mrs. Jin said, "How can I sleep if I make you angry enough?" Fengju smiled and walked in slowly, saying, "Why should I make you angry? Paifeng made a big fuss just now, but I didn't say a word." Mrs. Jin said, "You're bad enough. Do I need you to say anything? Let me ask you, where did you get a fortune of hundreds of thousands of silver dollars to be able to take concubines and do so much out there?" Fengju smiled. "You, old man, also believe in such rumors? How could such a thing happen?" Mrs. Jin raised her body slightly, took a papaya from the large porcelain bowl on the coffee table, raised it, and said, "If you keep talking back, I will smash your dog head." Fengju smiled and said, "If you really want to hit me, then hit me. That hit will be enough to make your head break and bleed. After the head is broken and bleeding, I wonder if you will feel sad or not." Mrs. Jin laughed and scolded, "You have made me angry enough. How can I still feel sorry for you?" As she said this, the hand holding the papaya dropped down. Seeing that his mother was no longer sulking, Fengju sat down on a stool next to him and said with a smile, "Mom, are you still angry with me?" Mrs. Jin slapped her thigh and said, "Don't be so playful and shameless. Are you still a child? Think about how you should be punished for what you did. According to my temper, I should never see you again in my life." Fengju smiled and said, "I also know that this is wrong, but I can't let it go." Mrs. Jin didn't wait for him to finish, and suddenly sat up and asked him, "How do you mean you are riding a tiger? I want to ask you why. Is there any way to be riding a tiger when you are asking for a concubine?" Fengju said, "At first, a few friends got together to make a fuss, and then it became real, and they had to do it, so I had to do it. In fact, it didn't cost much money." Mrs. Jin said, "Nonsense. You and your son are both of the same kind. At first, you kept the secret strictly and didn't leak anything. Later, when the matter became established, when you were asked, you said it was your friends who persuaded you to do it, and you said you had to do it. If your friends had to make you eat shit, would you eat shit too?" Fengju smiled and said, "Okay, let's let bygones be bygones. I'll apologize for your sin here." As he said that, he stood up and respectfully bowed 3 times to Mrs. Jin. Mrs. Jin laughed and scolded, "You are such an adult. Why do you behave so ugly? As long as you have the ability and can support yourself, you can marry 10 concubines, and I don't care. But how are you going to tell your wives? This is your own business, and I, as a mother, have no right to interfere. If you quarrel or fight over this matter in the future and cause trouble, you are not allowed to tell me." Fengju laughed and said, "I must tell my parents about how to marry a wife. How can I not tell my superiors?" Mrs. Jin said, "Bah, you are even more bullshitting. Did you tell us when you were engaged to Paifeng? Now, you want to marry a concubine, but you bring up Confucius and coax us 2 old yellow umbrellas, so that you can hold the emperor hostage. Ling Juhu, if your parents agree to let you have a baby, your wife will have nothing to say, right or not?" Fengju smiled and said, "Your words are always so serious." Mrs. Jin said, "Do I say that? I guessed what you were thinking at once. Get out of here and don't bother me here. I want to lie down for a while." Fengju sat down again and said with a smile, "As long as you say it, Paifeng will stop making trouble." Mrs. Jin said, "I can't control it. I don't have the ability. Didn't you see me in your room just now? I was so angry that I couldn't say anything. Now I support my son to have a baby. If she says a few words to me, where can I put my face?" Fengju was about to trouble his mother. Suddenly, he heard someone outside the corridor saying, "After dinner, no one is doing anything. Look, these chrysanthemums under the corridor are placed in a mess. What a mess, what a mess." Fengju heard that it was his father's voice. He didn't dare to say anything more. He stood up and left. When he walked to the corridor, he saw Jin Quan looking at the chrysanthemums with his hands behind his back. She walked past him quietly. Just after turning around the screen, a red dress flashed in the side door, followed by a fragrance. Someone shouted, "Hey, where are you going?" Fengju thought it was his wife who caught up with him. His heart thumped and he took a step back. He saw the shadow of the red dress flashing behind the screen. He thought, Pai Feng went to play cards. She would not come here at this time, and she was not wearing a red dress. So he calmed down and asked, "Who is there?" "You scared me." The man laughed and said, "You are too bold to say big or small. No matter how big the matter is, you can do it alone. Now I say something irrelevant. You are scared. I don't believe it." As he spoke, it was Qingqiu who turned out. She was wearing an Indian red cheongsam and a French fine velvet dark green scarf around her neck. She held a silver silk purse in her hand. An old maid behind her held a large bundle of paper wrap things, which seemed to be buying clothes and cosmetics. Feng Zhu said, "What do you want me to do for you?" Aunt Kui said, "I don't have anything. I heard that you were negotiating with the eldest young lady. Did you resolve the negotiation? Why are you leaving?" Feng Zhu said, "Aunt Kui went shopping, didn't she? How did you know?" Aunt Kui smiled and said, "I have good ears. Even if I'm not at home, I still know what's going on at home." Feng Zhu looked back and saw that there was no one around, so he bowed to Aunt Kui. He smiled and said, "I just need your help. Can you do me a big favor?" Aunt Kui smiled and said, "I'm lucky to come. What if I didn't come?" Feng Zhu said, "I'll go and ask you in a while." Aunt Kui said, "Master, you're so humble. You probably want to ask me for something. Just tell me what you want me to do for you." Feng Zhu smiled and said, "I've talked to Mom about that. I saw that Dad got angry when he came back. I wonder if it's because of me. If it's because of me, I want to ask you to help me." Aunt Kui said, "I can't do that." Your father turned around and puffed up his beard. I touched. It's not that big of a nail. But I can say a few words to your young mistress, asking her not to make it difficult for you. Feng Zhu said, "She is fine. I have a way to deal with it." But the two elders, this must be discussed in detail. Is there anything you don't understand about this matter? Aunt Kui smiled and said, "If the matter is resolved, how will you thank me?" Feng Zhu smiled and said, "You decide." Aunt Kui said, "What you said is a bit unreasonable. I am not doing the work for you. Why do you want me to decide?" Feng Zhu said, "Come on, don't make it difficult for you. I will come to listen to your letter in the evening." After saying that, he left without waiting for Aunt Kui to continue. Kui went into the upper room, where Jin Quan was still looking at the chrysanthemums. Kui asked the maid to take the things back to the room, and then she accompanied Jin Quan to look at the flowers. Yin said, "There is nothing special about the flowers this year. I don't even like to pick them." As she spoke, she pulled down the velvet scarf around her neck, handed it to Jin Quan, and squatted down to hold the flower head in the pot to look at it. Jin Quan took the velvet scarf, and a strange fragrance rushed into his nose, so he took it silently. When he saw Madame Ru wearing such a gorgeous dress and stretching out her fair arms to hold the flowers, he couldn't help but throw the flowers away and look at her. Kui turned around and saw Jin Quan staring blankly, and couldn't help but glance at him, smiled, and then got up and went back to his room. Jin Quan took the towel and followed from behind, saying with a smile, "Don't you want your things anymore?" As he spoke, he saw Qingqiu taking off her long dress and wearing a light red silk gauze thin cotton tights, opening the glass cabinet to change clothes. When she turned around, she slammed the glass cabinet door shut, and said with a smile, "You are so frivolous, you come to watch me change clothes." Jin Quan said with a smile, "I just happened to meet you. Since you don't allow me to be here, I will just leave." After saying that, he pulled away and was about to leave. Aunt Kui said, "Don't go. I have something to ask you. Weren't you very angry when I came back? How come you are no longer angry now? Who were you angry with just now?" Jin Quan came back because Aunt Kui called him and stood at the door. He threw the towel in his hand onto the sofa and said lightly, "Don't mind my business." Aunt Kui said, "Who cares about your business? When I came back, I saw you like this and thought you had offended me, so I asked. You are not angry with me. Why did you stick out your whiskers when you first saw me?" Jin Quan said, "Don't you know anything?" Aunt Kui said, "I don't know. If you know, why would I ask?" "That's nonsense." Jin Quan said, "It's all about Feng Zhu's matter." Aunt Kui said, "What about Feng Zhu? I didn't hear anything about it." Jin Quan said, "You are deliberately joking with me. The whole family knows about this. How come you are the only one who knows nothing about it?" Aunt Kui said, "I am not in a high position. I dare not ask about your affairs." Jin Quan said, isn't it because he married someone else outside? Aunt Kui said, what? I didn't hear anything about it. Jin Quan said, he married someone else outside. Aunt Kui said, did he marry another young lady? Jin Quan said, that's right. He has been doing this for a month, and the family has kept it a secret, like an iron barrel. No one knows about it. Do you think it's abominable? Aunt Kui sneered and said, your family has a few stinky money, and you are just ruining other people's daughters like this. Humph. This poor guy, who has been unlucky for 800 years, who knows where he came from. You have to be as humble as me and endure other people's anger. First you say that your family is so great and the best in the world. Then you marry someone off, and the master says it's against the family rules, and the wife gets jealous, which makes the man who married you in a dilemma. Humph. I see through you people. It's like you married a concubine, and it's not enough, you married me too. You get angry because your son only married one. This is like the officials are allowed to set fires, but the people are not allowed to light lamps. Jin Quan smiled and said, are you arguing with me or venting your anger on Fengzhu? You are so sarcastic and angry. I don't know what you mean. Kui said, why am I sarcastic? Am I not telling the truth? You are not doing the right thing yourself, but you are trying to control the people below. How can you do that? Can you? If I were Fengzhu, and you asked me about me, I would say that I learned this from my father. What would you say? Jin Quan smiled and sat on the sofa, slapped his thigh and said, okay, you don't need to say anything. I understand everything. It must be Fengzhu, who was afraid that I would be embarrassed with him, so he asked you to help me. You were afraid that I would have a hard time saying it, so you started to get angry with me first. If I can't say anything to you, you can do good or bad and plead with Fengzhu, don't you think? There is nothing in your mind that I can't guess. Do you think this sentence has guessed what's in your mind? Aunt Kui took out a piece of clothing from the glass cabinet, put on one sleeve, put half of the clothing on her shoulders, and put the other half on her arms. She stood there, quietly waiting for Jin Quan to speak. After Jin Quan finished speaking, he really guessed the riddle and couldn't help but smile. Aunt Kui put on her clothes and pointed at Jin Quan, and said, that's what you said. What if your young master also follows the example? Jin Quan said, if they all want to follow the example, let them follow it. As long as they have the ability, no matter what happens, they will not be able to do it. As long as they have the ability, no matter what happens, they will not be able to do it. If they do not follow the example, they will not be able to do it. As long as their children have the ability, no matter what happens, I don't care. Aunt Kui smiled and said, that's easy. Let me ask you, what do you plan to do with the person Fengzhu married? Should she live outside all the time? Or move back home? Jin Quan said, in my opinion, of course, it's better not to move back home. I can't give any advice on this matter. Let his mother take charge. At this point, he sighed and said, young people are confused. When they are happy, they do whatever they want. Later, they will know all kinds of pain. A man really doesn't need to have several families. It's better to be monogamous like foreigners. If both parties are willing, they can be together forever. If both parties are not willing, they can divorce at any time. Chinese people are different. If they are not satisfied with one person, they will plan to find another one that is satisfactory. Little do they know that once they get one, they are not satisfied. What's more, one must be dissatisfied. Even if one is satisfied, he will also become dissatisfied. It's like shaking a stake in a muddy field. The more one shakes, the deeper the mud becomes. It's really hurting oneself. Aunt Kui laughed and said, are you talking about yourself? Jin Quan said, you can say I'm talking about ordinary people, or you can say I'm talking about myself. Unfortunately, I can't write novels. If I could, I would definitely write a novel called The Mirror of Polygamy to describe the pain of having multiple wives in detail. Aunt Kui said, do you dislike having multiple wives? Maybe not. Why did you plan to accept a maid when someone gave her to you in the first half of this year? If I hadn't strongly opposed it, you would have asked for the maid long ago. Jin Quan said, what you said is totally wrong. A maid is a maid, and a concubine is a concubine. How can they be confused? Aunt Kui curled her lips and said, do you think I don't know? It's called a maid, but it's actually a concubine. Jin Quan said, your words are a little unreasonable. They're giving you a maid. Why do you say it's a concubine? Aunt Kui laughed and said, "This is all tricks played by you officials. I know everything. Because giving a concubine to someone is certainly not good, and if you give a concubine in the name of giving a concubine, you may not be accepted by your family. So you say it's a maid. After she's given to you, she's yours. What's the problem with you asking for a concubine?" Jin Quan said, "You can object to it too." Aunt Kui said, "Although you can object, it will be too late by then." Jin Quan said, "Come on, I won't talk to you about this. I have things to do." After saying that, he stood up and was about to leave. Aunt Kui reached out her hand, grabbed it, and said with a smile, "Wait, let me ask you something. What are you going to do about Fengju's matter?" Jin Quan smiled and said, "I know, he will definitely send you a generous gift to thank you. I'll give you a sincere letter, and you can tell him that it was you who interceded and settled the matter." Aunt Kui let go of her hand, pushed it away slightly, and said, "Nonsense. Why should I accept his generous gift? To be honest, I'm also someone's concubine, and I will always speak for other people's concubines. Don't you always say that the fox mourns when the rabbit dies? That's what I mean." Jin Quan said, "Don't yell. If you yell, it will just be right and wrong again. I'm very busy with my own things. How can I have time to take care of these things for you? I'm leaving." After saying that, he pulled away. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.